Don't weep for lost dreams. They were never real to begin with. Welcome, my mere mortalites, to another round of the book reviews. My name is Kyrin, host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but also this one where I dive deeper into the books that I'm reading to give you the juicy information that is within, to extract some themes you might not have thought about, and to also listen to some sad but also uplifting tales at the same time. We do have Bitter Orange Tree by Jokha Alharthi. So this book was first published in 2016 and is about 215 pages in length. Took me 4.5 hours to get through in total. It is the fictional recollections told by a young Omani woman about her life, about her family, and about her relationships. So this young girl's name is Zuhur, and it is told during a time when she is overseas in Britain, doing college, university, and really is reflecting mostly upon her grandmother, whose name is Bint Amir, who is back in Oman, or was back in Oman. And there's also some other characters in the book about her father, about her sister, about other past family members, about some friends that she has in the UK. But it really focuses on the relationship between her and her grandmother, and just her grandmother's kind of life story. And so we see this through these recollections, through these memories of medical adventures of her grandmother trying to fix her ailments, about deaths within the family, about finding and losing love, lost dreams, about pleasure and pain, and there's all sorts of just kind of day-to-day mundanities, but also big events that have happened in their lives. It really alternates between the first and the third person. So when she's talking about herself and, current events, obviously in first person, then third when she's recollecting upon things she could have never seen because she was not alive at the time. There's some poetry mixed in with here. There's also a lot of time jumps and skips between the chapters. So you really get this, I suppose, back and forth type of book. And yeah, there's lots of just random things like the white room, bliss, a leaf falling from the mango tree. The chapters themselves are relatively short. They're usually not more than 4 or 5 pages. So let's jump onto the author herself. And Jokha, I'm mispronouncing her name entirely because I don't know how to, my Arabic is not so great, was born in 1978, and she was born in Oman, and also very similar to her character in this book, lived in the UK for at least a time period, I believe, while she was studying at university. So this book was originally written in Arabic. I have the translation here by Marilyn Booth, which was published in 2022, so very recently. And Jokha herself is known for her book Celestial Bodies, which she won International Booker Prize. So very much this is kind of like another book in that, not sequence, but her follow-up, I guess, to that. So that's the kind of intro to this. And I also read this because a book club that I've joined, I guess, has this was one of their books. So that was how I found out about this. Let's jump into the first theme, and it is lost dreams, accepting the bitter reality of life. Oh, bitter reality. So let's talk a little bit about Bint Amir's life. And this is her grandmother, and she was born, sometime in the 20th century, probably towards the start of it. And she had a rough life. There's no doubt about it. So, she was expelled by her father and her new wife when her mother died at a very young age. And so she also at a young age with her brother was kind of kicked out of the home. They had to fend for themselves. Her brother dies. And so then she is really fending for herself, doing these crazy treks to get charcoal out in the desert, of burning things, of having to basically be self-reliant from, I don't believe the ages are given, but a very, very early age, in the teens, something like that. Extreme poverty, of extreme toil as well. Her life is just filled with these kind of movements from one place to the next, really just scraping by. She gets somewhat taken in by a family and then helps out this family for the rest of her life as the maid, as the cook, as someone who is very much a part of the family, but also not of blood relations per se. And we see, just as through these recollections, these snapshots from her life, which gives us a kind of complete picture from the very young age to a very old age. And the book actually starts off with her as this very old lady with a kind of broken thumb or a fingernail, which is all black. And it's kind of a mixture of, I suppose, these recollections which are favorable in her light, showing her good qualities, and also some of her bad qualities. And I suppose just the realities of what it is like to be old and to be frail and to be somewhat losing your mind or things like this. So we really see a good description of her life. And she actually has quite a few dreams in her life. And I'm going to jump over to here to page 135 and 136. And this is when she's kind of middle-aged, perhaps getting a little bit towards later in her life. And these two twins have kind of joined their household for a little bit, and they have then left the household to create their own piece of land, to work on that land and things like this. And so, Mashallah, you could hear the woman exclaim to one another, Raya and Raya work like men, and they don't need anyone. Envy tormented my grandmother, even though she had always been extremely wary of its scorching flames and considered it the worst of all possible sins. When people described the twins as independent, my grandmother muttered to herself, yes, and how proud they have let themselves be. Her dream of having a plot of land and living from it, from her own earnings, had come to an end, just as earlier her dream of having one perfectly sound eye had ended too. So we can see she had these dreams throughout her life, and when they started occurring, it's kind of hard to tell because of these switchings back and forth. But the main ones were she had this eye, which was damaged, I believe, from a very young age, and through the medicinal helpings of the healers and things like this who tried to make the eye better, they actually ended up damaging it to the point where she was blind in this eye. And she had this hope of being able to fix it one day, hence why she goes to the doctor and tries to do that. She had this dream of becoming a mother for herself, of having her own children, and of owning land, as we've just seen there. And what we find throughout this book is that sometimes dreams have to die. Sometimes you have to lose these things. And it's very sad in a way because she really did try to make them happen. She did try to enact these dreams in real life. So she, went to a doctor far out of her way to have a look at her eye and to see if it could be healed. She worked like a slave basically for large portions of her life to try and earn money, to try and be independent, but she couldn't do that through the Omani, I guess, system of marriages and things like this. She also was kind of denied the chance of becoming a mother, of being married off, and so she had to live somewhat as a slave. Not a slave, she chose to be there, but she didn't have these opportunities that she kind of had an access to, a little glimpse, a hope of them happening. But as we see throughout her life, that no, they not end up eventuating. That being said, is all hope lost? Not necessarily, because she ends up getting these eyeglasses, which were, helped to restore part of her vision, and this was a somewhat of a substitute. She becomes a surrogate mother to Zuhor, who is not her actual child, but she becomes a surrogate mother when the actual mother is going through postpartum depression, and because she's so closely linked with this household, she gets the opportunity to become somewhat of a mother, a second mother to them. And even in owning her own land, she doesn't physically own it, but the garden outside is hers, and no one else gets to touch it and tend to the trees and the bushes and the things she's creating, because they know, okay, this is Bint Amir's, no one else is allowed to touch this. So she has these ideals, these dreams. They're somewhat lost, but if you really want to get to it, they weren't real anyway. They are, unless things are enacted out in real life, they are just dreams in your head. And so can you lose something which it was never enacted, I guess, is a question. So it's really interesting just seeing her reactions through the book, and how does she take these setbacks, these blows to life, because she does try and enact these dreams, but bitter reality steps in. The eye is unable to be healed. She gets to an age where she can't have children, and where the social structure doesn't allow her to marry off. And just, through circumstances, through the mechanics of money and of her life, she isn't able to own her own land. How does she take this? Well, I think this is where the title comes into this, the bitter orange tree, which is very symbolic, I think, in this book. It's this tree which is, it's hardy. It's somewhat imperfect, as it implies by the name, the bitter, because these oranges, I believe, are bitter. I'm not sure anyone in the book actually eats them straight off the tree. They're more of a food that you can use later. It's somewhat imperfect, but it is unique. It is hers. It is special. And I think we see this in the end. Without her tending to the tree, no matter how much anyone else tries to do it, the tree withers. It goes away. It doesn't have a purpose. And I feel she somewhat finds purpose in her life, even though her dreams, sure, these things in the clouds that she would love to have happen, aren't able to be realized in reality. And because reality is bitter, it can be cruel at times. She doesn't lose her purpose for living. She keeps going on, and she has these qualities of trying to see if she can make them happen, but also accepting, okay, sometimes, life just deals you a hand of cards, and you've just got to make the best that you can do with that. And this, you could dive even further into, I guess, her psychological makeup and okay, how does she accept these things? How does she, is it a religious-based thing? Is it what's her view in the world? That sort of stuff. I don't think you need to take it that far. You can just see that she is a strong woman, and she really, I suppose, enables herself and doesn't dwell on the past as well. She's very much a looking forward type of person. So these lost dreams, this accepting the bitter reality of life, I think she's a great character who is symbolic, is emblematic of a person who is a strong female stereotype. I would look up to her if she was my grandmother. Let's get on to the second theme now, which is lament, passionate expression of grief. And this is going, I suppose, on to the other character, Zuhor, and what could have been in her life, what could have been. And the writing style is very much her living in the past, because it does have all these recollections. Sure, she has these moments where she is with her friends, or where she is contemplating something of her life in England, but there is always just this looking back to what could have been, or things that had happened. And so most of the stories are highlights of change in people's lives. It's not her experiencing it in the moment. It's like, this happened to other people. This was a moment in time in the past. And so she has this lament when her grandmother, Bint Amir, passes away, which, once again, it's kind of weird, because in the book, she's saying stories as if she's still alive, but we know she has passed away. And so there is this kind of bit of a conflict going on. And it's actually right after so page 138. So right after the little story that we heard just there. And so, my grandmother died. The people around me were sympathetic, but no one was prepared to understand me. Sympathy isn't understanding. Mostly, I think it takes an opposite road. She was over 80 after all. Now she is at rest from the pain. Now she no longer has to crawl from her room to the courtyard. She's somewhere much better. You all took such good care of her. Isn't old age a good enough excuse for dying? Or more important, a good enough excuse for accepting the death of someone we love? That's what people think, I suppose. Just as my grandmother was fortunate enough to receive a lot of sympathy in her life, or at least some, I was fortunate enough to receive it when she died. But neither of us was fortunate enough to have true understanding come our way, and I wasn't allowed to have, or supposed to have, such powerful feelings of regret pulsing through me. Sumaya, the dynamo, got married, and then she lost her title and became just Sumaya. And then I went away. And then all those hours passed, all those years, which we managed to fling away, conveniently forgetting what had opened our wounds in the first place, forgetting how to diagnose the causes. But we did sometimes remind ourselves that those wounds had not gone away. Because after all, at some point in time, even before the passage of those hours and years, we had already been broken into pieces. So she has this regret and sorrow, which is somewhat understandable. She towards the later part of her life, was somewhat putting off her grandmother. She was young. Her grandmother was old and failing and dying and was losing her mind a little bit. And she was, wasn't washing her hair. She was dirty. She was rambling to herself. And she creates this build-up, I suppose, of this lament, of this passion, of this expression of this grief, of not really being able to express it at the moment, or she's always living in the past, I suppose. And so when she, her grandmother passes away while she is overseas, she's already looking back. She's already holding on to things. And look, this is what happens when someone passes away that you love. It is traumatic. You do go through this period. And I suppose the question that I ask is like, what's next for her? Because you can tell from the book, she's very sensitive and empathetic. Everything in the book is her trying to understand what other people are going through, whether it be her friends and her sister's kind of boyfriend thing, who she shouldn't marry, but she marries secretly. And she's trying to understand the two of them. And this guy's somewhat mysterious. And, she's always just putting herself into other people and into their shoes. And I really wonder, does she have the tenacity that her grandmother has of being able to deal with heartbreak, of loneliness, of lost dreams? Would she be able to handle all of these things? Because she seems to live in the past a lot, and that I don't think that's great for, if you lose a dream and you have to accept the reality of life. I'm not sure it's a great thing to be dealing and dwelling in the past, of thinking, it could have been this, it could have been that. We somewhat see that with her sister, which is referenced here, Sumaya the Dynamo, who was this girl who was full of energy, full of life. She was always doing things, and she had this ideal of being married, of, my life is going to be perfect when I get married. I'm going to have this loving husband, everything's great. And she marries this guy, and it turns out he's rather abusive and doesn't love her for who she is. And, she somewhat becomes disillusioned. Her husband dies, partly due to her fault for not calling out when he was drowning. And she becomes mute the rest of her life. And, once again, this could be that a showcasing of people who aren't able to move on from their dreams. They are stuck in this past, or they can't accept what has happened to them. And I somewhat, to be honest, like Zuhor, it's between, she's got two examples, her sister who wasn't able to, her grandmother who was, and where is she? She's in this like middle zone where she hasn't had a lost dream yet, hasn't had a love, had a heartbreak, or whatever it is that she really cares about. We don't know, because she doesn't really focus upon herself much in the book. And it's interesting to think which of these two paths she herself personally will fall down. So there we have it: lost dreams and lamenting and living in the past of grief and expression. Let's go on to my own personal observations and takeaways. One thing I did like about this was the relatable faults. It's very easy in books like this to have these recollections of the past and build up these characters as these, idols, these magnificent people who can't be touched, who were, especially if they've passed away, even if they had bad things about them, they were like bad things that showcased how good they were, that sort of deal. What I liked about this was it was really relatable. The grandmother, Bint Amir, for example, her faults were, sometimes she was just envious and jealous, as we read in that passage. And that's okay. That was just who she was as a person, and it's not a showcasing of how she overcame these jealousy or this envy. It was just, no, here's something she did wrong, and there it is. And so I think it's easy to become impersonal with this sort of style, but with herself going to therapy of the envy, of the petty rage, of her friends, all of them, we see like, okay, these are really just people. That's what I liked about this book. These people were just people. They were not built up to be someone special, or which is hard, because when you're talking about these emotions, about these deep connections, about family, about relationships, I think a book like this, it can stray too far into being, I suppose just this creation of people who are untouchable, who were, especially if you're looking back, they were these amazing people. Whereas this one's like, no, I understand these people. Some parts of the book, onto something I kind of disliked about it, some parts were hard to decipher. So especially right at the front here on page 12, we've got this explanation here, which was talking just about, it was just an intro. So everything happened in the course of the First World War. Shipping was at a standstill in the Gulf, and goods were hard to come by. The price of a sack of rice shot up to 100 kirsch, each kirsch the coin, the old, heavy silver Maria Theresa's thalers that circulated in Oman back then. A bag of dried dates cost 30. A woman's head shawl couldn't be had for less than 2 entire kirsch. Drought stuck. Famine. There was just that one sentence itself right at the start. I had to reread that like 4 times trying to make sense of it. You kind of can, but it's just a very unnatural style. And this happens a couple of times throughout the book where it's a sentence which doesn't flow that well. And I can't tell if it was written intentionally like this or if this is just translating from Arabic into English. The sentence structures just don't allow for as nice a smooth flow, or something is gone wrong there. Even the descriptions of other people, I wouldn't go so far to say they're over the top, but they are extravagant, especially when she's talking about Imran and his kind of cold beauty, his stoic type of principles. It's very, very descriptive, and sometimes it's it's just a bit much. So that was one thing I kind of was a little bit iffy about the book. So in summary, I came into this really blank because it is definitely not the standard thing that I read, and honestly was pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of cultural insights to this about Oman, about the type of culture that they have there, of relationships between people, what is and isn't acceptable. And I really liked Bint Amir as a person, as this grandmother. I thought she was a character that could definitely be looked up to as a strong female, and it's definitely outside of my normal range. The style would get old if I read this type of recollections of jumping back to the past all the time, but I enjoyed it more than something like The Death of Artemio Cruz by Carlos Fuentes, which I've read on this channel before, which was just a bit too much, and it was a bit too kind of incomprehensible, even though it dealt with a lot of the same themes of, an elderly man dying, or an elderly grandmother, of someone losing their mind, of kind of lost dreams. So I definitely enjoyed this book more than I would say that one. Who would I recommend this for? Probably young expats, for example, people who are missing home, who are studying overseas. They might get something from this book of just relating to the kind of just what it's like to remember things from the past, of not being there when a loved one dies and things like this, or someone going through a complicated loss, because it's important to see, not everyone is this amazing person. They do have faults and flaws, and so seeing that and acknowledging that at the same time, I think could be helpful. And honestly, just if you're someone struggling and living a lot in the past, it might be a showcasing of why this perhaps isn't helpful. So overall, Bitter Orange Tree by Jokha Alharthi, I'm giving a 7 out of 10 to. Pretty solid book. Would recommend for sure. And that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me to the end of this book review. What are your thoughts on Bitter Orange Tree, on Oman, if you've read any other books from there, on Arabic, on lost dreams? I would love to know any and all of these things. Best way to do that is just by leaving a comment down below, hitting like, and sharing this with someone who perhaps you think would benefit from this book review. Would be very much appreciated. Very helpful. Thank you. I would also just recommend checking out the Mere Mortals podcast. A lot of the themes that I take from books, I talk about with my friend Juan in a conversational style. So link is on your screen now. And I really just do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Some changes to the book reviews coming up next month, so just look out for that. And until the next time, ciao for now. Kyrin out.